Hello everyone, welcome back to LewisFiction and welcome to the Spider-Man Cinematic Universe. This is all the parts of the Spider-Man Cinematic Universe series compiled into one long movie version for you guys to enjoy who have not watched it before, to avoid unnecessary intros and outros, and you can just flow from one to the other. With that being said, if you enjoy this type of content, make sure you're subscribed, and hopefully you enjoy the Spider-Man Cinematic Universe as we kick it off with the first film in the entire series, Spider-Man. The first film in this series will of course be Spider-Man. You can't start anywhere without the main focal point of the universe, which of course will be Peter Parker. However, unlike before in many other fan writings and pitches that I have done before, Peter won't actually be starting out by getting bit by the spider, but he also won't be a good 5-10 years into his career either. Peter will be exactly 1 year into his Spider-Man career when we meet him in this story. I'm taking a similar direction to the direction that Matt Reeves took the Batman, where he was 2 years into his career. We will kick off this film with Spider-Man stopping some crime, roping us right into the action. It will be revealed in this first scene that the big criminal empire known as the Maggia crime family are running the streets of New York City. And ever since Peter became Spider-Man, he has been trying to take them out, but he can't seem to get any closer to stopping them. It will also become clear that one of the thugs that worked under the Maggia also killed Uncle Ben, similar to the Ultimate Spider-Man comics, fueling Peter's motivation to turn them in even more. Through a series of events, the Maggia see Spider-Man as a growing concern to their empire and reign over New York City. Therefore, they need a new plan to take him out. We are then introduced to a man called Hammerhead, who is the person who the groups of organized criminals for the Maggia answer to. He is a hard-hitting leader, someone who doesn't take no for an answer. However, we get hints that there is actually someone above Hammerhead in the Maggia, who even he answers to, but at this point in the film, this isn't exactly revealed. We will then cut to a few scenes introducing us to the world of Peter Parker. This is when we will get to learn of the key players in Peter's life in this universe. I wanted to spice it up. Mary Jane, Harry Osborn, Gwen Stacy, and Flash Thompson have all been overcooked in adaptations, and personally, when they are used, it's usually the same old spiel. Gwen dies, MJ is introduced after, and Flash Thompson is a bully. So therefore, I'm going to switch Peter's inner circle to differing characters that can provide new and interesting stories as the universe progresses. Peter will still be an outcast from the rest of Midtown High, and it will be clear that he is unpopular as ever. However, he will have one friend, that friend being Cindy Moon. Now, Cindy will be just as much as a nerd as Peter, and quite frankly, that's what drove them together in the first place. They will bounce off each other quite well and will be really good friends. It is also revealed that Cindy was there for Peter when Uncle Ben died, and Ben's influence can be felt throughout this film as it's still quite fresh in Peter's mind. Cindy and Peter have become really close, but Peter is still hiding his identity from her. This will be a main theme throughout this film and quite frankly throughout this universe in general, Peter's identity with the people that he loves. Peter will also still have a crush throughout this film as well, and she will be a main driving force for Peter's motive in this film. And his crush will be none other than Jenny Lincoln. Now, of course, this character is based off Janice Lincoln from the comics. However, the name Janice is really out of fashion and not something that modern high schoolers would be called, so Jenny is what we're calling her from now on. Jenny will be a popular girl, similar to Liz Allen from Spider-Man Homecoming and Spectacular Spider-Man. In fact, I'd go as far as to say, as this character is probably more of a merger between Janice Lincoln and Liz Allen in some sort of way, as some elements of the characters do cross over, and there are some similar aspects that you guys will start to notice later on in the film. After the introduction to Peter's high school life, we'll be introduced to none other than Aunt May, who will be the same age as Sally Field's Aunt May from the Amazing Spider-Man movies. We will also get to see both of them and their relationship. It will be clear that they love each other, however, there will be something a little bit off. A rift has been put between them since Ben's death, and there's almost a feeling that they're keeping something from each other. Of course, from Peter's perspective, it is him being Spider-Man, but Aunt May, a year into losing her husband, is really struggling with bills and can't afford to pay them. Peter will be aware of this situation, but will act naive with May, because he knows how much she wants the best for Peter, and she wouldn't want him to be worried in any way possible. It is also revealed that there is a massive risk that if the bills do get too dire, that they will be evicted from their home. And this theme will loom across the entire film, with Peter constantly having it on his mind and constantly being in his internal monologue. A big portion of the first half of the film will also be bouncing between Peter and Spider-Man, fighting the war against the Maggia by night and being top of his class by day. His life, for the most part, will be relatively balanced, and it's actually going quite well for him at this point in time, unlike other pieces of Spider-Man media. Now hang tight with me because you'll see what I'm doing with this thematic element later on in the film. In fact, Peter's life is going so well that Peter's incredible grades and performance at school lands him in an opportunity to work for the Mayor's Bright Minds Initiative, which, it will be revealed, is a course run by the Mayor's office which gives young students in New York the connections they could possibly need for major future jobs. Once this opportunity presents itself for Peter, he immediately, knowing the situation with Aunt May, will snap at it, taking it immediately. It will also be revealed that none other than Jenny Lincoln was also presented a position as well alongside Peter for her top engineering grades at Midtown High. So both Peter and Jenny will be put forward for this job. Peter will go home that night and tell Aunt May, and she'll be really happy for him. As we cut to Peter doing another patrol as Spider-Man in the early hours of the morning, this is when we will actually be introduced to the main villain of the film, who will be the Chameleon. This time, the Maggia anticipated Spider-Man's arrival onto one of their crimes, and brought backup, almost like a trap for him. The Chameleon in this universe, however, won't just be able to appear as whoever he wants, but will also be a master martial artist as well. He grew up training like a warrior, and will be a match for Spider-Man, unlike anyone he has ever faced before. Pair that with the fact that he can shift into anyone that he likes, this will create a psychological element for Spider-Man in his battle against him. He will leave Spider-Man defeated the first time that they meet, and the Chameleon has done his job as far as he's aware. Given Spider-Man's presence rising over the last year, Hammerhead wanted to employ a scare tactic against Spider-Man to try and remove him from the picture. And since Chameleon gave Spider-Man such a beatdown, Hammerhead is pleased with the result and believes that Spider-Man will no longer be showing up to stop their crimes, believing that the scare tactic has worked. He will also mention to the Chameleon that the boss is happy as well. The Maggia believes Spider-Man to be out the picture. Battered and bruised, Peter's pride is hurt. The next day, however, he has to look his best because he's meeting the mayor of New York City personally to introduce him to the new course. Before meeting the mayor, however, Peter does run into Jenny, who he has an awkward interaction with. Jenny has a fun and playful personality, but is a very calm and collected person. Peter, however, is a nervous wreck, but there does seem to be some chemistry between the two. They seem to be almost exact opposites of one another, but that's exactly why they seem to work the best. We cut to the scene where it will be revealed that the mayor of New York City is none other than the man called Wilson Fisk. Peter and Jenny will be delighted to meet him, and Fisk will comment on a black eye that Peter has carried with him. Peter will tell him that he just fell on his way back from school. Fisk smirks and says he knows a black eye when he sees one, and asks if the other guy came off worse. Peter says he doesn't know what he's talking about as he starts to panic. Fisk will smile and will go on to say about how he likes a fighter, someone that will risk it all to get what they want. He doesn't seem to believe Peter's story, but despite that, he believes Peter to be the perfect person. He really starts to take to him and really likes him. Fisk tells both of them that once a week they will come to the tower and work in the science department and engineering labs respectively, working alongside some of the best minds, expanding their wealth in knowledge. Peter thanks Mr. Fisk for the opportunity, but decides to ask how much it pays. Fisk will laugh and says that it doesn't pay, but if he works hard, he is sure that it will open up many doors for him. He places a hand on Peter's shoulder as he walks them both to the exit as he hands them their timetables. Peter and Jenny will leave gratefully, however they will both comment to each other about how intimidating Mr. Fisk was. He is certainly a man of stature. Peter then makes his way home. He thinks to himself, even if this doesn't pay, he sees this as an absolute win. All he has to do now is show his worth, and he's guaranteed a high-paying job when he leaves school. That would help Aunt May massively. The rest of the film from here on out will be Peter trying to uncover the mystery as to who the Chameleon is. It is revealed through a scurry of scenes that the Chameleon's real name is Dmitry Kravinov, originally from Russia. He grew up working and training for the KGB, and is currently in New York trying to earn big money because his father is dying. Cancer specifically. Dmitry couldn't find any other way of saving him, but decided to put his skills to good use when Hammerhead reached out for a client to try and take out Spider-Man. Couldn't say no, and had to take the job. On the high school side of things, Peter tells Cindy all about the mayor internship, and how he gets to see Jenny on an often occasion now. Cindy tells him to go for it and ask her out, but Peter says he can't. He's too nervous. Peter asks Cindy how to know if someone likes him back, and Cindy says she has no idea, as if she's ever been in a relationship before. Peter scratches his head, wondering what to do. A few weeks pass and Peter and Jenny see each other more often, growing closer and closer together as they start to work with each other more in the mayor internship. On a few occasions, Peter will also meet Jenny's father, Lonnie Lincoln, as he regularly comes to pick her up from the tower after the internship ends. This will be the happiest Peter's life gets. Everything up until this point seems to be going right. Peter will pluck up the courage to ask her out, and Jenny will say yes. Peter is ecstatic. They have both grown really close to each other, and Jenny seems to like Peter as well. We will cut to their dates, as they will walk to the movies together. This will be one of the rawest scenes in the movie. Because they have gotten so close, Peter ends up telling Jenny about Uncle Ben, and tells him a little bit about his past. He doesn't reveal his secret identity, but he tells her a little bit about his uncle, and about how it was partially his fault that he died. Jenny will sympathize with Peter, and will start to feel really comfortable with him. However, then something happens. Just before they can get to the movie theater, for the first time in Peter's life, something seems to not go right. A robbery. The Maggia are making another move. Peter's life has been going great, and we have been up to this point shown the highs that he has been on. But does that topple responsibility? No. And thus, Peter has to ditch his date with Jenny, leaving her utterly confused. This is to show how strong that will to responsibility is to Peter. We have been shown this before in Spider-Man media, but never to the extent that I'm willing to go here. I believe if we start out by showing Peter at his highest, the case of his responsibility is going to shine through and make him a more convincing protagonist overall. Peter will once again encounter the Chameleon at the scene of the crime. The Chameleon brings an extra level of respect to their second outing. Only because, despite how badly Spider-Man was bashed down in their last encounter, he has come back and stood his ground. They fight, the Chameleon once again getting the upper hand on Spider-Man, but he doesn't give up. The Chameleon and the Maggia manage to escape once again. However, this time round, Peter manages to snag one of the weapons from the scene of the crime. Peter deduces that he could potentially track down where it was manufactured. However, he'd need the technology to do so, and that's when he realizes he could take it into the mayor's tower and potentially analyze it using their equipment. And that's exactly what Peter does. During his next shift, he turns up with the weapon in his backpack. However, he bumps into Jenny first. She isn't happy. They both have an interaction with each other, and Peter apologizes for ditching. Peter tries to simply explain that his aunt needed him and that he's sorry. He should have explained. Even though Jenny doesn't buy the excuse, she understood that Peter opened up to her a lot that night, and maybe he was just scared of what she'd think. She comes up with a valid emotional reason in her head, and ends up forgiving Peter. Peter asks if they can give it one more shot. Jenny says one more shot, and Peter thanks her. Peter also asks Jenny if he can do him a favor, and she says yes. Peter pulls out the gun, and Jenny is freaked out at first. Peter calms her down by telling her it's deactivated, and it's also one of his Uncle Ben's old novelties, and he just wants to find out where it's been made. Or at least that's the excuse that he gives. He was wondering if she could take it apart and get a design code, and Jenny, being the engineer expert, agrees. She does just that, showcasing her skills, and gives a manufacturer code to Peter. Peter puts this to good use, and tracks down where it was made. It's made by a company known as Alchemax Co. Peter does some digging and finds out that the co-founder was a man known as Joseph Lorenzini. Peter does some research into Joseph and finds out that he has been arrested on several occasions for gang and crime activity, but since has been released. Peter believes this to be the man at the top of the Maggia. Spider-Man goes searching at an address linked with this Joseph fellow. He crawls through vents until he steps into a meeting between him and a man called Lonnie. Peter quickly realizes that's Jenny's father and is shocked. The Chameleon also walks in as they continue talking about plans for a new wave of activity up in Harlem. They keep referring to the boss as someone called the Kingpin. Peter wonders as to who this could be, until a figure approaches and walks into the room. It is the Kingpin, but Peter's eyes widen as it's revealed to be none other than Wilson Fisk, aka the Mayor of New York City. The reason the Maggia have been getting away with everything is because Fisk is the mayor. He is at the top, controlling everything and everyone like a puppet. Spider-Man was the only one that stood in his way this entire time, which explains why the police can't catch the Maggia or track down who is behind it, but also explains why they're putting so much resource into trying to take out Spider-Man in the first place. However, then, at the worst time possible, Peter's phone rings and everyone notices him. The Chameleon chases after Peter as he looks to escape. However, he captures him. He ties Spider-Man down to the middle of a chair with all the major players in the Maggia looking directly at him. The Kingpin walks straight up to him and says he's been a thorn in his side for the last time. He tried to warn him, scare him through the tactics of the chameleon the first time, but clearly, he's too stubborn. Fisk pulls his mask off to reveal Peter Parker underneath. Fisk's eyes look bewildered, and a bit more remorse shines through. "Always the fighter," he will say to Peter as he smirks. Peter will tell Fisk to stop this madness, and Fisk laughs, telling him that he will never stop. Peter tries to force himself out of the rope, tying him to the chair, but it's too tight. Peter keeps pushing and pushing as everyone laughs at him until the rope snaps and Spider-Man bursts from the chair, leaping up and kicking Hammerhead in the face, sending him back. A battle between the chameleon and Spider-Man ensues as Fisk exits the room, telling them to take care of him. Peter and the chameleon battle for a third time. However, Peter's newfound strength within himself seems to shine through. They go at each other until the chameleon once again gets an upper hand. Chameleon tells Spider-Man that it's time for him to die. However, Peter jolts up, kicking him in the face and sending him to the floor. He webs him up, leaving him to the police, along with Hammerhead and Tombstone. Spider-Man enters a triumphant swing as he goes after Fisk, who is getting away. A giant battle on the road ensues as the Kingpin tries to knock him off the top of his limo. Spider-Man kicks the window in and kicks the Kingpin out of the other side of the car, with him landing on the road. Fisk says he's dead, and Peter tells him to bring it on. They both fight with the world watching, as it gathers people's attention. Spider-Man, however, shows his newfound confidence within himself and defeats the Kingpin, saving the day, arresting the man behind the magia all along. Peter got his justice for Uncle Ben. Peter got justice for everyone that has been hurt by the magia. However, the implications of Spider-Man's actions start to dwell on Peter. We cut to the end of the film. Jenny Lincoln has to move away. Her father was arrested, and they can't afford the house they currently live in. Peter can't help but think that he's ruined her life. Spider-Man hasn't just ruined his chances of getting with his crush, but he's ruined her life for the worse. Peter returns home that day to find an eviction notice. Because Fisk was arrested, it made his position at the mayor's internship redundant, and thus no job opportunities ever came his way. He failed to help Aunt May, the person who Peter Parker should be looking out for the most. But he did the right thing. He stopped Wilson Fisk. Spider-Man did the right thing. The film ends with Peter and May moving in temporarily to May's friend's house, Anna Watson's, as the film ends with Peter setting his stuff down and going out for one final swing. Peter's life may have crumbled, but at least New York and its people live to stand another day. Following the story to how the chameleon ended up in New York, we take a look back at the story of Dmitry Kravinov and his brother Sergei. We cut to a snowy land far north in Russia. A family resided, the Kravinovs. Life was good. We focus in on Nikolai, Sergei, and of course Dmitry Kravinov. Nikolai, the father, was your stereotypical male figure, hard-hitting, brute force of a man who had done the majority of his life in the military. However, he had two sides to him. One, a caring, loving side, a side that best represented his family and his wife, who sadly died at childbirth to their youngest, Dmitry. But he had another side, the fighter, the side that would never give up no matter what the odds. These sides were best represented through his two sons, Sergei and Dmitry. Sergei loved nature, he loved animals, and always had a fascination with the way nature worked and all its wonders. Living in the far north allowed Sergei to really delve into nature and explore it in many different ways. As a child, he would always befriend the wild animals in the highlands, big cats, wolves, even reindeer. Sergei wasn't afraid. Whereas Dmitry was the opposite and represented his father's fighting side. As a child, he took up 3 martial arts classes, wanting to become the ultimate warrior, and almost fantasized with himself about one day becoming a spy and being the master of all disguise. During this prologue type period, the film will open up showing us these traits, shining through as children. But above all, we get the sense that Sergei and Dmitry love each other. They loved each other dearly. They're brothers, and they'd do anything for each other. It was their mother's death that made them care for each other more than any other pair of brothers could. Even though Dmitry was the fighter, his older brother Sergei had commendable respect about him. As they grew up and became teenagers, he was always bigger, stronger, and more masculine. His physique was astoundingly big for his age. Dmitry was always jealous of this fact, and you could almost sense that growing up they would always bash heads at some point. And one day, they did. They fought, got into arguments on the daily. Eventually, their father had had enough. If there was one man that they both feared more than anything in the world, it was their father. He would tell them to cut it out, or they're both gone. They have to learn to respect each other for who they are. Eventually, this divide between them became too much, and their differing personalities and Dmitri's jealousy drove them apart. Sergei eventually moved out as well, moving further up the farlands with his wife Calypso to study nature and animal behavior, and Dmitri moved into central Russia towards Moscow to work for the KGB. And that brings us to the very start of our film. Throughout the film, we will cut between both our main protagonists until they eventually meet again. We will follow Sergei first, following his life in the hills. He started to grow a reputation in and around the nearest town to him. He almost became a figure of great significance, nicknamed Craven the Hunter. Sergei wouldn't like that name, but it would be an identity that stuck to him throughout his entire lifetime. The town would commonly see threats of bear attacks and wildcats approaching the people. Our first introduction to modern-day Sergei will be him dealing with an animal attack on the town, him calming the people and the animal, befriending it and making peace. The people will be impressed by Sergei's ability, and he'll become somewhat of a legend for this sort of behaviour. Some people would even refer to him as godlike. We will then cut over to Dmitri, training in the ways of the KGB, just as we learned he did in the first Spider-Man film. He will be nicknamed the Chameleon by his fellow spies, as he was the best at what he did. He was a fighter, and he was a damn good one too. He could trick or psychologically torture anyone he'd see fit, and would always be the first picked for a major mission. We will follow Dmitri on a mission to showcase his skills in action. When we are reintroduced to Dmitri in the modern day, he'll be on a mission with the KGB, hunting someone called the Widow. Yes, even though this is a Spider-Man universe, this will be a reference and a slight adaptation to the Black Widow character from the comics. However, she won't act anything like Natasha Romanoff. It's more of a reference more than anything. The Widow will be a notorious criminal who had been on the run from the KGB for a while. Dmitri's mission for the past several years has been to bring them in, but it's been a war on two fronts. The Widow has since begun to fight back, taking out and destroying KGB outposts and even holding KGB generals for ransom. Dmitri will finish the mission, and in a short burst of exposition, we will reveal some crucial information to the last known whereabouts of the Widow. However, the scene will be cut short when he gets called from Sergei, his brother. He hasn't spoken to his brother in years. This is weird. It must be urgent. He picks up, and that's when we get the news and the inciting incident for the film. Sergei will tell his brother nothing more than, it's their father. He's dying. We will cut to Sergei and Dmitri meeting for the first time in years. Dmitri still smaller than Sergei. In fact, Sergei was bigger. You could cut the room's atmosphere with a knife. Dmitri's jealousy bled through the screen. The camera angles and positioning of the scene will all be in favour of representing the tension and divide that still resides between the brothers. They will meet with their father, who they haven't seen in a while either. He reveals to them both that he has terminal cancer, incurable. However, the reaction that both of them will have to this turn of events will be completely different, and this is what separates these two characters throughout the film. Sergei, being the more caring and compassionate one, will want nothing more than to make his father's last few months the best he's ever had, spend more time with him and make him happy. Sergei has a burning passion from this point on to reunite as a family. However, Dmitri refuses to lose his father. The fighting spirit inside of him will want to do anything he possibly can to cure their father, saying that he has connections inside the KGB that could potentially use an early in development drug that could actually cure his cancer. Sergei will wholeheartedly disagree with this, telling his brother that if it doesn't work, all they're doing is wasting time that could have been spent with their father making new and meaningful memories. Dmitri says that they can do that for years to come if he manages to cure him. Sergei will tell his brother that he's deluded. He can't think this is a good idea, surely. Dmitri will say he's going to do everything in his power to make sure their father survives, while Sergei sits by and watches him die. Dmitri will say that he's lost all respect for his brother. The news that their father would have hoped would have brought them back together as a family has only divided them further, as Dmitri leaves the house, determined to find a cure, and Sergei sits by his father, telling him he's sorry. His father never really showed emotion, but Sergei could tell he was hurt. Nikolai says he's going to get some rest as he heads to bed. The next portion of the film, Sergei will track down Dmitri and will confront him. Sergei will find him in a bar near the outskirts of Moscow. Sergei will approach him, and Dmitri won't be happy to see him. This scene, however, will be from two perspectives. As the brothers talk with one another, the camera will be positioned in ways in which it looks like they're being watched. This will also be emphasized through the musical choice during this scene as well. Dmitri makes his intentions clear. He will find a cure for their father, and that's final. Sergei tells his brother how upset he just saw their father, and he's never seen emotion from him like that before. Sergei will tell Dmitri they are all he has left of their mother, and constantly for years their rivalry has gotten in the way of that. At least give the man something that he wants while he can still have it. Dmitri turns to Sergei and tells him he's not faking something for a dying man. Sergei slaps Dmitri around the face. The whole bar stops and stares. The POV camera angle that looked like it was watching them from a corner of the bar goes static. Even the bartender stops and looks towards Sergei. Dmitri, embarrassed, tries to fight Sergei back using his training. However, the brute strength and force of Sergei is too much for him. His older brother comes out on top, humiliating him in the process. Sergei is calm and collected, and mostly on the defensive. Sergei will step away from Dmitri as he lay defeated on the floor. He sheepishly gets up, brushing himself down. Sergei looks around and tells everyone to get back to their drinks, as the noise rises again. Dmitri barges past Sergei as he walks outside. Sergei follows him once again, trying to convince him to come around. However, the man that was stalking them during the scene also follows them outside, and he pulls out a gun, shooting Sergei in the arm. Sergei turns around bewildered. He pulls a face of discern towards the man who was dressed in all black before feeling faint. It was a tranquilizer bullet. Dmitri shouts towards the man as well. However, they were both caught off guard, and Dmitri is whacked over the head as the man knocks him out. This will be the midpoint of the film, where everything turns and the film twists into something a little different. Sergei and Dmitri were so caught up on their feelings as to whose idea of what course of action to take with their father was right, that Dmitri now has taken his eye off the ball, and has been captured by a group of mercenaries. Not to mention, he's gotten his brother wrapped up in it too. The film went from whose ideology is correct to how can they get out of this situation as fast as they can to get back to their father. Even though their rivalry and their ideologies are different, they still have the same goal: get back to their father. And the twist is that they have to put their differences aside to work together for the greater good, or else neither of them will be able to enact their perfect resolution for their father's fate. Dmitri will showcase his spy knowledge by hatching a plan to escape the prison cell that they're put in. However, just before he can get them out, a guard comes to the cell door and will reveal that none other than the widow will see them now. Dmitri knew somewhere in the back of his mind that somehow the widow would be connected to all of this. Sergei will be asking who the widow is, and Dmitri will be trying to explain as quickly as possible who the widow is and what situation they're actually in as they are dragged to see her. After being taken to the widow herself, she explains that she has been watching Dmitri for the past few weeks, studying his patterns of movement until he threw a curveball and left town. It wasn't until she realized that he was seeing family that he would be the most vulnerable, so she decided to strike. Dmitri has been the main instigator against the widow for the KGB, leading them to mini victories, being at the front of that war. The widow says that she's going to kill them both. Even Dmitri's antics couldn't get him out of this one. And that's when Sergei's brute strength comes in handy, as he breaks out of the shackles. The guards attack him, and the first big action set piece of the film breaks out. I'd like to think that most of the camera movements would be rough and handheld, really cementing this film as its own style, and differing from the Spider-Man film that would have had a lot more floaty and flowing camera movements to signify Spider-Man's heroism. However, this would be a gritty and down-to-earth story in a setting far from anything that resembles a superhero. This is a hand-to-hand, get-down-and-dirty fight scene. I imagine a lot of inspiration taken from fights such as Kingsman for the choreography, and the camera position and movements inspired by the Russo brothers from Captain America Winter Soldier and Civil War. Sergei and Dmitri escape the guards. However, the next portion of scenes will be a chase sequence from the widow and her guards. They will have to work together and play to both of their strengths to escape the guards. Dmitri will use his chameleon-like tactics, and Kraven will use his brute force to fight off the remaining guards. When they escape the widow's base, they will find themselves in the middle of nowhere in far north of Russia, which means they can't be far from their father's house. They both travel in the cold snow by foot until they find somewhere to rest for the night. They light a fire until a bear approaches from the wilderness. Dmitri will be afraid, but Sergei won't show the fear. He will tame the bear, and it will become friendly with them, once again showing Sergei's more compassionate and caring side. He may be a good fighter, he may be strong, but at his heart, Sergei is a lover. How good he can be with animals will be a constant reminder and representation throughout this film that Sergei wants nothing more than peace. This will be a nice scene between the brothers. It will give them a proper chance to catch up with one another in a more respectful manner. Dmitri will tell Sergei that he misses how things used to be, and Sergei will say the same. Dmitri will tell Sergei that he hates how their father dying had to be the reason for them to reunite. Sergei says it doesn't have to be. Dmitri finally realizes how much he's missed his brother, and how narcissistic he has been. However, this scene is interrupted by guards in the distance. This will then lead us on to the final portion of action for this film, where they try and escape, but are left with no choice but to fight. And thus the widow plot will come to a close during this final battle, where Sergei will help Dmitri finally take out the widow for the KGB. This will be a gruesome fight, and one that won't happen easily for them. However, they carry on using their brotherhood to their advantage, and their need to get back to their father as their emotional motive to defeat the widow. After all is said and done, they finally return home to their father, and this is where everything comes full circle. Their father will have massively deteriorated, and Sergei will pull Dmitri aside. He will tell Dmitri that he's been thinking. He says he's realized something, that all this fighting that they've been doing, it's got to stop. He will tell Dmitri that he's noticed that their father doesn't care if they cure him, or just simply are there for him, because frankly, those are two things that in an ideal world, he would want. But neither of those things are the most important. Dmitri asks what is the most important, and Sergei will say them both, as brothers. He will tell Dmitri that he's realized that all their father wants for them is to be brothers again, to see them stop fighting. Whether their father dies or he doesn't, all he could want is for them to be brothers again. Sergei will tell him that it doesn't matter how it happens or what separates their ideologies, they have to learn to get along together. And that's the main theme and the main arc of these two characters, to learn to appreciate one another for who they are and where they belong, whilst also respecting each other's ideologies. Dmitri has to respect that Sergei might want to spend more time with their father, but Sergei also has to respect that Dmitri potentially would like to try and cure him as well. And with that said, Sergei will continue to stand by his father in the same way that he always wanted to, while Dmitri will carry on looking for a cure. And while their original goals stay the same, they are brothers once more. We will get a farewell scene between the brothers, as after the defeat of the widow, Dmitri has taken a leave of absence to move to New York. A big job has come on offer for the capture of a vigilante in the city, and the main hiring pays well. Sergei will ask who's hiring, and Dmitri will say his name is the Kingpin. He says he's been offered a huge sum of money, which can be funded into a new cancer research for their father. Sergei wishes him well. They shake hands, and Sergei says be careful out there. New York is full of some weirdos nowadays. Dmitri says he will. Sergei will tell him if he needs help, give him a call. Dmitri will jokingly say he won't, and they will laugh it off together as Dmitri leaves for New York. We will close the film with Sergei leaning over Nikolai as he sleeps, weaker than ever. Sergei places his hand over his father's head and apologizes for the way that him and his brother treat each other, and will say he will do anything for family, as we end the film there. However, we will have one post-credit scene to end the film off. We will cut to a title screen 3 months later. Police sirens can be heard as we cut to Dmitri as he walks through the prison hallways at Rikers Island. We pan away from him as we exit through a TV screen reporting on the arrest of Dmitri Kravinov, Hammerhead, Tombstone, and of course Wilson Fisk, who were all involved to be a part of the Maggia crime family. It will be revealed that Sergei is watching on the other side of this TV report as he repeats himself once more, anything for family. And we cut to black right there. Decades before the events of the first Spider-Man film, we follow a young Lonnie Lincoln as he makes his way up in life to the point where we meet him in the first Spider-Man film. This movie follows his life, follows his journey, up until we meet him in modern day. We open with a younger Lonnie Lincoln. His father is barely around, and when he is, he never pays attention to Lonnie in any sort of way. Lonnie was 5 years old during this time. It would be rough for him, but this section and opening of the film is to really drive home the emotional weight of his character. Tombstone from the comics or other Spider-Man media is always perceived as this tough guy. He doesn't break under any pressure whatsoever, and I want to recreate that but almost give him a reason as to why he's like that. An emotional weight thrust upon him. During this opening, we will understand why Lonnie goes on to be the hard case that he is, because he simply had to grow up before everyone else. His father was never present, which meant that he had to self-teach himself many simple things. Simple things in life that a father should be there for. He wasn't. As Lonnie would get older, he would find out that his father was actually a criminal. However, during the building up to this reveal, Lonnie had grown a resentment and almost hatred for his father. He hated everything he stood for, which included him being a criminal. Eventually, Lonnie's father would be arrested and Lonnie would be put into foster care, as we come to start our main narrative. We cut to Lonnie Lincoln in school, a teenager. He is around 15 years old and will be about 30 years before the events of the first Spider-Man film in 1994. Lonnie is the quiet kid. He's skinny and not athletic in the slightest. Despite being the one kid that no one knew how to approach, he had one friend, Doug. Doug was just another boy, similar build to Lonnie but was nerdier. Doug would always get picked on by the same group of people and bullied every single day. Lonnie would say to him that he has to stand up for himself. Doug would tell Lonnie that it's easy for him to say he doesn't get bullied, and Lonnie will say that's because I'm the quiet kid, there's nothing to bully him for. You see, Doug could be loud and obnoxious from time to time, whereas Lonnie would sit at the back of the classroom chewing his gum, not drawing any attention whatsoever. Despite his father not being present growing up, Lonnie had it instilled in him from the longest time how to not be noticed. He never wanted to be known as the kid without a dad, or a mum for that matter. Therefore, he had to create a shell around him, a shell that was unbreakable. If no one knew who he is or what he was, no one would go near him. Lonnie trusted Doug, however, and that was simply the effort that Doug made with him. Doug didn't have any friends either, so they were just simply a perfect match. Lonnie secretly, deep down, believed that Doug needed him more than the other way around. Doug always seemed like a ticking time bomb to Lonnie, as if one day he'd explode and go off the deep end. And that's when one day he did. It was just another day during school, and Doug was getting bullied all the same during the morning. However, he had took on board what Lonnie had told him, and he fought back. And he fought back hard, causing a massive brawl in the corridor. Lonnie on his way to school sees this as the bully was getting an upper hand. The bully pounded Doug's face so hard that Lonnie felt the need to step in. He ran over to the bully and tackled him to the floor. A fight breaks out between the two of them, and it's brutal. However, Lonnie topples the guy and starts beating him to a pulp, screaming as he does it, until he's dragged off by a few teachers. The bully lay there defeated. He surprised himself. Lonnie's pent-up anger for his father all came out in one. In a twisted sort of way, he did to that bully what he wanted to do to his dad all those years ago. He'd had a taste of anger, and now he was even more angry. All those years of bottling up those emotions and keeping quiet at the back of the classroom spilled out in that hallway. Lonnie would end up getting suspended until a teacher called Mr. Marvin gets involved. Mr. Marvin was a coach. In fact, he ran most of the sports classes at the high school. And he pleaded Lonnie's innocence. Mr. Marvin taught Lonnie for years, and despite not really knowing him too well as he didn't speak much, he claimed that the boy needs help, and not to be pushed back further. Marvin claimed that he realizes the pain that he's going through, and that he needs to be taught discipline and a way to channel his emotions properly, because what happened in that hallway is not in any way the anger of a normal child. That's someone who's been hurt. The principal hears this case and decides to let Lonnie have a second chance, and assigns Coach Marvin as Lonnie's personal tutor. Marvin will dig deep into Lonnie's persona, and this section of the film will really be a character study of Lonnie himself. Marvin will find a way for Lonnie to channel his anger into something productive. And of course, that will be him working out and going to the gym and participating in sports events. We follow this transformation of Lonnie as he starts to appear more along the lines of the Tombstone that we all know and love from modern day, with a bigger physical build and a massive presence. During this time, however, Doug will have stayed the same, whereas Lonnie will have gone through this transformation. And despite them still being good friends, Doug will start to resent Lonnie in some sort of way. He got jealous of Lonnie's discipline and dedication. Lonnie really started to turn his life around and gained more confidence as we follow him through the years. And this is where he ends up meeting a girl called Rebecca. Rebecca and Lonnie would get on very well and would start dating. This further separated his life from Doug, who relatively stayed the same. This pushes them further apart, and the idea of Doug needing Lonnie rather than the other way around becomes clearer than ever. Doug had no friends and was all alone. Lonnie was doing well for himself, and it really felt like his life had gone in the right direction, but had never realized that he'd left Doug behind, the same way that his father left him. A few years later down the line, Lonnie will open a boxing gym called Tombstone, which in this universe is where his name comes from. The name Tombstone will be associated with him for the rest of his existence. Rebecca went on to get a job working in retail, and together they would buy their first house. It also turns out Rebecca is pregnant, and she will be having a baby girl. Everything seemed to be going in the right direction for them both in life, when Lonnie hears from Doug in the first time in a while. He sees him at his boxing gym as Doug enters. This scene will be tense, the camera movement static. Doug confronts Lonnie and says that he was his best friend. Why did he leave him? Lonnie says that they just grew apart. He never meant to actually leave him. Doug starts to break down, weak and on his last legs. Lonnie asks what he's really doing here, and Doug says that he's in a lot of trouble, and Lonnie was the only person he could turn to. He has no one else, not like him. Lonnie asks what kind of trouble, and this is when we learn that Doug's downfall led him down a path of crime, just like Lonnie's father did. And just like how Lonnie could have done if Coach Marvin didn't intervene and take him under his wing all those years ago. He owes money, and a lot of it. Doug doesn't know what to do, And this really is the massive dilemma and turning point for Lonnie as a character. Does he help Doug and break his code of never following down the same path of his father, or does he not get involved and leave Doug to it by himself, just like how his father left him? Ultimately, after an internal battle with himself, he decides not to help him. He has a daughter coming, and he will not put her at risk for crime. He's going to change his family legacy. This causes Doug to have an outrage, and this conflict comes to a boiling point as they fight. Lonnie underestimates Doug, and he manages to get an upper hand, but ultimately Lonnie's training provides him the platform to come out on top. Doug tells Lonnie he's a traitor and a fraud. Doug leaves the gym, battered, bruised, as Lonnie looks on. A few months later, Rebecca will give birth to little baby Jenny Lincoln. However, just after this high point in their lives is when Lonnie finds out some of the worst news of his life. He gets a call. Doug, unfortunately, passed away, shot 3 times in his apartment. Investigators are trying to figure out why. Lonnie knows why. Lonnie saw him. He could have prevented it. Lonnie knows that he could have had a hand in saving his once best friend. And with that, our tragic story comes to a close. The film will end with a few text bubbles explaining Lonnie's story, connecting to the first Spider-Man film. Lonnie would end up being investigated after the police found out that Doug saw Lonnie a few months before his eventual death, and found it relatively suspicious. And because Lonnie withheld information, he would become susceptible to prosecution. However, after a plea for freedom to see his daughter grow up, a man known as Wilson Fisk would bail him out and give him a second chance, under the condition that he ends up working for him. After all, Lonnie would end up a criminal, not by his own will, but by his failure to help others in a desperate attempt to run from his fear. Next, we follow the story of someone who lives in the corner in the shadows of New York City before their uprising. Here is the story of how Norman Osborn became one of the most successful and wealthy men in New York City. This 4th film in the Spider-Man cinematic universe will be slightly different to the rest that have come before. Despite the other spin-off movies about other Spider-Man villains like Brothers and Tombstone being about the downfall of those characters and the tragic past that precedes them, this film will be about Norman Osborn's rise to the top rather than the downfall and decline of his character. So even though films like Brothers and Tombstone and even the first Spider-Man film to some extent were a lot more depressing in their resolution of the characters, this film will be more positive and will probably be the most light-hearted film in the entire cinematic universe thus far, which is quite ironic considering this film will be about one of Spider-Man's greatest foes and his uprising. However, we will be made to feel some sort of connection with Norman throughout this film. He'll be a very charismatic and likable guy, and when we first meet him at the start of the film, he will have absolutely nothing. He will be broke and will be working on science experiments out of a little garage that he rents on a monthly basis. We will get a slight tour around the garage. We can see a bed in the corner of the room where he sleeps, and one singular light bulb hanging from the ceiling, with a little desk in the corner with all of Norman's equipment on it. Norman will be a proper scientist, just wanting to make his creations known to the world. And I want this to hit home. When we meet this character, when we get introduced to Norman Osborn at the time, all he wants is for his creations to be noticed. He doesn't care about money, he doesn't care about public reception, he doesn't care about fame. All he cares about is his inventions and the impact that he can create with them. And he cares about science more than anything. And Norman's willingness to work out of a tiny garage will be a representation of this. Norman's journey will begin when he finds out that his neighbor's dog had been a part of a tragic accident that had caused it to lose 2 of its legs. This tragic moment thrusts Norman into action. The dog's owner is desperate to get the dog back to full health, and that is where Norman comes in. Norman manages to create a device that allows the dog to be able to walk again in a very, very wholesome moment. This kind of mechanical invention gets Norman in the local newspaper, and from here the film takes a turn. Norman starts to become famous as he starts to invent different devices for people around his local village. This very soon becomes a career for Norman as he rises to the top, jumping from job to job very quickly as his salary increases. However, one thing is still very, very clear. He does not care about the money, he doesn't really care about the recognition. In fact, the only thing that we've really learned more than anything about Norman during this portion of the film is that he just likes helping people, and he gets more satisfaction more than anything out of helping the people in need. If he can make someone's day, and if he can help someone with a problem that they have, he has succeeded. It doesn't matter about the monetary gain. This is when we meet a man known as Albert Moon, and this is the second turning point in this story. Now, in contrast to Norman Osborn, Albert will actually be someone who has more of a business mindset, looking to utilize skills of very talented people for gain and wealth. His rash and non-caring attitude will be a massive part of his introduction. He's cocky, he's arrogant, but very subtly, he gets on very well with Norman Osborn. Despite Norman's personality being the exact opposite, Norman's charismatic exuberance manages to bounce well with Albert. And before you know it, Albert and Norman are in business together. Albert convinces Norman that he can't keep living in poverty if he is to help people. Albert will tell Norman that 50% of the job comes from being that beacon of hope. And what kind of beacon of hope would Norman be if people just saw him as this normal, scroungy inventor who lived out the back of a garage? Albert convinces Norman and almost manipulates him to think bigger and to think better. If Norman wants to help people, he's got to do it in the most glamorous way possible. That way, he will get through to people. He will be seen as almost a celebrity. And since Norman's want throughout this film is to just help people, his naivety will go along with this as he sees this as an opportunity to reach more people. However, as the film goes on, we start to notice changes in Norman's character. He just starts to become more like Albert as the film goes on. He becomes more arrogant and he becomes more cocky, and we get to see that there's a sense that Norman is starting to transform into the character that we actually know and love from the comic books. However, deep down, we will see that Norman still does have that kind heart. But despite this, we are also setting up that Norman might slightly have a twisted view on the world because of Albert's influence over him. This is when Albert and Norman create their first major business together. We will get a scene between them where they can't decide what to call it. They have two names, either MoonCorp or Oscorp, taking inspiration from both of their last names. Norman suggests calling it MoonCorp since Albert is the main investor. However, Albert says Norman is the poster boy for the company as the public love him. Therefore, monetarily, it would be wiser to call it Oscorp. And that's exactly what they do. The film from here on out will follow their success as Oscorp becomes one of the biggest companies in the United States. We will follow their rise to the end of the film as they buy out their HQ in New York City. Everything is going really well until Norman starts to realize that the quality of their products starts to diminish. Less investing is going into the products that they are making, which starts to damage Oscorp's reputation. Norman takes this up with Albert when we get a scene when it's revealed that Albert had started to make changes for the monetary gain, and this is where the conflict of the film starts to boil over. Albert will tell Norman that it was never about the people, it was never about the inventions, it was about making money. That is what business is. Albert said he wouldn't even be here if he couldn't make the money. And Norman will clap back saying that all he's ever wanted to do is make inventions for this world and make it a better place. And this is where Norman starts to realize what a foul piece of trash Albert really is. Albert will tell Norman that he's deluded, and Norman will tell Albert that he's got no heart. Norman is the most superior inventor in the company, and without his designs, Albert wouldn't be able to make a living. And looping back around to his kind heart during the start of the film, Norman will say he's out. He's not inventing for this company ever again. And with that, Norman Osborn, off his own back, leaves Oscorp Industries. And as you'd expect, the company starts to go downhill without the involvement of Norman Osborn. However, during this time, Norman would lose all of his money, investing it back into his inventions because that was all along what made him happy. However, with the loss of his involvement in Oscorp came the consequence that he didn't have the reach as he once did. If Albert was good for one thing, it was getting Norman's inventions out to the world, and since he has left Oscorp, he is now a nothing. No one cares about him, no one really even knows of him anymore. Norman realizes that maybe Albert was right slightly. On the Oscorp side of things, it is in tatters. They are looking for someone to buy the company outright before it goes into liquidation. And this is when the film comes full circle, as Norman Osborn steps right back into the equation by buying the company off Albert for the remaining money he had left. Albert had no choice but to take Norman's money to make any kind of profit. And Norman realized that he could get his inventions back out into the world only if he had a platform. When he realized that the stars aligned and that he could just buy back Oscorp, off Albert with the remaining money that he had left because the company was going up for so cheap. Norman intended buying Oscorp back so he could inject himself back into the way that he saw fit. Oscorp was not going to be a money-making scheme. It was going to be a powerhouse in inventions and science initiative. And with that, it brings us to the end of our film and the rise of Norman Osborn and Oscorp Industries. After everything, here is the convergence of all the stories that we have seen thus far. Here is Spider-Man 2. Now, I want to mention I'm approaching the second Spider-Man film a little differently than one might imagine, and I'm taking a huge risk by doing this. But what I'm going to be doing is slightly different and I think quite interesting. This film won't just have Peter as the main protagonist, but Norman and Sergey as well. I'm treating this film as a crossover film, more along the lines of the Avengers, but for the characters that have been built up throughout the cinematic universe thus far. The first Spider-Man film was obviously an introduction and fleshed out story about purely Peter Parker, and the same goes for Osborn and brothers, exploring Norman and Sergey. But this will be the film where all their stories come together, sort of like how Tony's, Steve's, Thor's and Banner's stories all converged in the first Avengers film. However, even though Peter won't get 100% of the focus, his story will still take priority. But Norman and Sergey will get huge roles as their stories are also majorly important to the narrative as well. With that being said, we open up on a plane soaring over to JFK Airport. It lands and off comes a big bulky man. It is Sergei Kravinov. He has landed in New York with one mission: rescue his brother. We then cut over to Manhattan to Peter Parker. Peter and May have fully moved into Anna Watson's house after being evicted from their own. It's Peter's fault that they are both in this situation. Aunt May relied on him and he couldn't step up to be the man of the house because he was too busy fulfilling what Uncle Ben had taught him. With great power comes great responsibility. Yeah, sure, the city is safe from the Kingpin, the city's crime rates have dramatically decreased since the disbandment of the Magia, but at what cost? The living situation and happiness of his family? That's a big price to pay, but Peter knows he had to pay it. Or did he? This will be the start of Peter's story throughout this film. The idea of if Spider-Man even matters. Does Peter's personal life and how the people are affected around him matter more? Peter will question whether Spider-Man does more harm than good. This will be spiraled into action when he catches Aunt May crying. May is a trooper and a fighter. He has never seen her cry before in his entire life, even when Ben died. She has always been there to protect him, to provide for him, to show him the way forward. But he's getting older now and feels as if it's his responsibility to look after her, to return the favour. This will be the turning point for Peter's character at the start of the film. This will be his inciting incident. But he can't do that when he has the responsibility as Spider-Man to protect the people of New York. This will spur the conflict of this film on. Peter has a choice. He can't have his cake and eat it too. During the first opening few scenes, Peter and May will be at Anna Watson's and we will see a news report of the mayor election. After Fisk's arrest, someone has to take the reins. That man, of course, being Norman Osborn. Osborn, as we learned prior, has always been interested in politics. Oscorp Industries is run on moral and ethics rather than money. Since his solo film, Oscorp has gone on to become a well-oiled machine, with Norman barely needing to step in anymore to help run it. So he's found some time to go on to other things and explore other personal goals. One of them is to make New York City a better place from the inside out, which is why, in the last few months after Fisk's arrest, he has been planning on a mayor campaign. However, despite Norman's drive to make the world a better place, he still has an ego, and the narcissism that bled through into his personality from his friendship with Albert Moon is still present. He has developed an idea that he will win no matter what. Since his revival of Oscorp, Norman has won no matter what the cost, and this idea of him getting what he wants, when he wants, no matter what, will be a big part of Norman's story throughout this film as well, and how it ties into the overall narrative. We will then get a few scenes of Peter stopping crimes in between going to school. This will then be coupled with Spider-Man becoming more popular, almost like a celebrity. The world clocks on to who Spider-Man is, and he becomes very well known in the public eye. This will be when the new mayor, Norman Osborn, makes it very clear that he is against Spider-Man. Norman sees crime around the city as a rebuttal to Spider-Man's presence. Even though, yes, crime rates have dropped, Spider-Man's presence means that petty theft criminals now come equipped with more machinery and weaponry to combat the possibility that they will run into Spider-Man, which means that more destruction and more harm to innocent civilians occurs during the battles that Spider-Man has with these criminals. Norman will say that the mere presence of Spider-Man invites the competition, and this is where Norman's story begins. He wants Spider-Man out of the picture, and couple this with his newfound egotistical nature, he will do everything in his power to make sure he gets what he wants and make sure his goals are achieved. On the Peter Parker side of things, the beginning of this film will also show us how Peter and Cindy Moon's relationship from the last film has actually taken a turn for the worst. They were best friends, and Cindy was there for Peter throughout the death of Uncle Ben. But since Peter has started to notice that everyone in his personal life, especially Aunt May, has started to get hurt because of his responsibilities as Spider-Man, he starts to push her away. In the last film, it was glorified how good Spider-Man could be for Peter's life. However, once he started to realize the consequence of that, Peter has now done a 180. He has started to push people away. Peter loves Cindy, but he fears that one day he's going to end up really hurting her because he's not going to be able to live up to a promise. He's not going to be able to live up to her expectations as her best friend. It will be subtle to begin with, but he will be more blunt with her and stop taking her calls. They will stop hanging out as much, and Cindy will start to notice this. At this point in the film, she will be more concerned than anything, and will wonder if it has anything to do with the fact that Peter and May got evicted. She will try and confront Peter about this, telling him that if he needs to talk, she's always here for him. But it's like talking to a brick wall. Whatever she says, Peter blows it off and says everything is fine. This leads us to the first major converging point of all of these characters. We are thrown right into the action as Sergei enacts his plan and breaks into Rikers Island, trying to rescue his brother. This will be the first major action set piece of the film, and will be very similar to the prison break sequence in Spider-Man PS4. Once Sergei gets in, a massive prison riot will start, which will overwhelm the guards. Most of the heavy-hitting thugs that Spider-Man has put away over the last couple of months will be causing the majority of the riots. These will obviously include the likes of Tombstone and Kingpin as well, who will also escape during this time. Sergei will go on to find Dmitri, and they will embrace. Dmitri asks Sergei what the hell he's doing here, and Sergei will say that family comes first. He wasn't going to let him rot away in here when their father is dying back home. Dmitri says that he should have never come here. Sergei asks why, and then out of nowhere, Spider-Man jumps into the scene, trying to help contain the riots. This is when he meets Sergei for the first time. Dmitri says Spider-Man is no mean feat. Sergei engages in battle with Spider-Man as they fight it out. Spider-Man is strong, but Sergei is stronger, showing the strength that we saw he was capable of during Brothers. The fight will be brutal, and it will be Peter's hardest fought battle yet. It doesn't help either that he also has to fight the goons on the side at the same time. Peter will ask, "Who is this guy?" and Sergei will say, "Someone that doesn't concern you." However, once Sergei gets him down, he doesn't continue to beat down on him, but rather returns to his mission. Spider-Man is only an obstacle in his way. However, Spider-Man returns to engage Sergei. Sergei tells Spider-Man to stop, but he can't. Spider-Man will say breaking fugitives out of prison is kind of illegal. The battle will rage on until Spider-Man finally manages to come out on top. Sergei is strong, but the brute strength of Spider-Man and agility eventually was enough to take Sergei out and to come out on top. And with that, Sergei was unsuccessful in his mission, and Sergei himself is sent to prison. After all is said and done, the conflict boils over. Norman Osborn, the mayor of New York, is asked to comment on what has happened, in which he blames Spider-Man for it all. He will say that this wouldn't have happened if the competition for Spider-Man wasn't there. Spider-Man needs to retire. On the Peter side of things, he will see this constant slander against him as the city starts to turn on Spider-Man. This celebrity-like persona that Spider-Man has conjured over the last few months has now turned against him as the public start to trust Norman Osborn. Norman starts to turn everyone on him, and this creates an interesting dynamic for our character. He can't seem to do right as Peter Parker, and he can't seem to do right as Spider-Man at the moment either. At this moment in time, it's also been a few months since him and Aunt May moved into Anna Watson's house. He probably should be looking for a job, Peter will say to himself. During this time, Peter will start to push Cindy away more as well. Cindy and Peter's friendship will be a representation of how disconnected Peter becomes with reality and with himself. Him pushing everyone and everything away will show the imbalance between Spider-Man and Peter Parker. A massive identity crisis will become clear as we make our way to the midpoint of the film. However, on the Norman Osborn side of things, he is hatching a plan to finally take Spider-Man out of the picture, as he slowly descends into obsession with trying to win this battle against the wall crawler. This isn't a job for the police, and the police can't really arrest him, so Norman will have to take to other means to get what he wants. He thinks of an imperfect, perfect plan. Something slightly illegal, but if he is to win this fight, he must fight fire with fire. We will then get a scene where Norman will approach Sergei Kravinoff from prison. He wants to make a deal with him, saying he wants to hire him to capture Spider-Man. Sergei will say that he has no interest in fighting Spider-Man. He just wants his brother to be released. And that's when Norman gets an idea. He will tell Sergei that he can make that happen. if he brings Spider-Man in. Norman will give him equipment, performance enhancers, new weapons and tech, anything he needs to overpower Spider-Man and take him out for good. Sergey says as long as he promises to release his brother afterwards. Norman will say that he has his word. This is when everyone's stories in the cinematic universe thus far start to converge on one another. However, back on the Peter side of things, Cindy starts to get frustrated with Peter, and she's reached a boiling point. She lashes out at him, telling him that they were best friends, and that she shouldn't block her out like he's doing. And this is where Peter starts to realize his mistake. The only way to win in this situation is to be honest with her, to be honest about who he is. After all, she does deserve to know. This is something Peter will contemplate within himself as the film continues on towards the final battle. However, pondering on this thought will have to wait, as we do enter the final stages. Sergey will return, looking for Spider-Man and to take him out. This will lead to a massive confrontation between Peter and Sergey, as the two of our main protagonists come to blows fighting for different things. Peter fighting for the responsibility as Spider-Man whilst fighting his inner desire to give up, and Sergey fighting for his family to reunite, and Norman Osborn orchestrating everything from the sidelines. This final battle is brutal, it's tough, and the hardest Peter has ever had to fight. But this is what makes Peter realize that no matter what, there will always be villains, there will always be people that need saving, there will always be people that are against Spider-Man. He can never give up being Spider-Man no matter what. Peter will eventually come out on top, and Sergey will be sent down, bringing a tragic end to his story, one of loss and one of grief. After all is said and done, Peter will realize that he has to be honest with Cindy. Peter will apologize and will reveal his secret identity to her as a way to explain why he's been so distant, saying that he couldn't be honest with her. Spider-Man and his responsibility has been driving a wedge between him and the people in his personal life, but him not being honest was doing more damage than him keeping a secret, so he decided to tell her. He will say not to tell anyone, but she deserved to know. Cindy and Peter will embrace as they make up. The film will draw to a close as we follow Aunt May finally getting back on her feet. She gets a job at a place called Feast, and Cindy will tell Peter that she's just started a job at a place called the Daily Bugle, and will say that she can try and get him a job there too, as he knows the situation with him and his aunt. Peter will say that would be great. Peter's new job at the Bugle will be a representation of that balance finally being struck between his personal life and Spider-Man, as he will go on to take photos of Spider-Man for the Bugle whilst also making money at the same time. I feel as though this way of incorporating the Daily Bugle into this character arc makes the most sense and also lines up with the story that this film would have told. On the Norman side of things, this will be the first loss that he's experienced in a while. But during this film, his downfall has come from his obsession with this new found ego. He will win at any cost, and he has just lost something that he doesn't do often. Spider-Man will be defeated one way or another, and suddenly, this ego that Norman has formed transforms his outlook on Spider-Man's defeat. At first, he wanted Spider-Man out of the picture because he thought it was the right thing to do for the city. But now, he wants Spider-Man out of the picture because he feels defeated. He feels lost. And this is not a feeling that Norman likes. He will win. And with that, we end our big event film there. After the events of the Rikers Island attack, we now cut over and follow Tombstone once again, as Lonnie Lincoln looks to rectify his past mistakes and make amends with his family. However, he meets some unsuspecting allies along the way. We start our story right in the middle of the events of Spider-Man 2 during the Rikers Island breakout. However, while Peter and Norman are more focused on each other, in the other corner of the story we have two of the other main figures. In the heart of New York City, amidst the towering skyscrapers and bustling streets, two figures emerge from the shadows. Lonnie Lincoln, known to the criminal underworld as Tombstone, and Wilson Fisk, the infamous Kingpin. They make their escape from Rikers Island and have now made it into the lower levels of New York City. With a hideout secured by Fisk, he plans his next move to conquer the city once again. Instead of hiding in plain sight, Fisk decides it's time to take a more hands-on role in the criminal underworld, and he wants Tombstone as his right-hand man to help him through all of this. But Tombstone has different priorities. He reveals to Fisk that he has a family to find, a family to take care of. Tombstone has had some time to ponder while he's been in prison. He doesn't want this life. He never wanted this life, but he got roped in by unforeseen circumstances all those years ago. However, his time in prison has brought him back to the ground. It has brought sense back into him. He knows that he can't do this anymore, and when Fisk advances on him saying he must help him, Lonnie refuses. Fisk, enraged by Tombstone's refusal to join him, disowns him, declaring him dead to him. A brawl breaks out between the two. We see the mighty strength of Lonnie, but also the willpower of Fisk. He's not an easier man to overcome, and ultimately Fisk comes out on top with Lonnie just about escaping. After this introduction, we are then thrust into the main part of the film. Lonnie will have no home, and will have no connection to the outside world. He'll sleep on park benches, and will be hiding away from the cops. However, his main goal, find his family. Find Rebecca and Janice. He will attempt to call them on payphones around the city. However, his attempts to reach them are futile. His calls go completely unanswered. With no way of contacting them, Lonnie goes to the only person that would know where they'd be, Rebecca's mother. He arrives at her house, and at first she scowls and frowns Lonnie away from the door, but he begs for her to talk to him. Her mother tells Lonnie that he put her daughter and her granddaughter through hell, and that he doesn't deserve them. And in the pouring rain of New York, Lonnie rests his head on the brick wall as she slams the door in his face. Lonnie knocks again, but she doesn't answer. He speaks from the other side of the door as she listens from the inside. He tells her that he's made a lot of mistakes, a lot of ones that he regretted, but everything he's done in his life is for her, to protect her, to make her feel safe, and to provide for his daughter. If he could go back and make different decisions, he would, as he thinks back to everything that happened with Doug during the first Tombstone film. Rebecca's mother opens the door again and lets him in. She lets Lonnie explain himself, and Lonnie tells the story of how he got roped into the situation he was in. He got out of prison, and he wants to find his family, but he didn't know where to turn. She ends up telling him where they have gone. Rebecca and Janice have moved away to California. Lonnie thanks her as he goes on his way. However, as Lonnie prepares his trip up to California to find them, he is then intercepted by a strange figure who kidnaps him. The play was smart, and the figure managed to take him out in one swoop, as if their move was completely entirely calculated from the moment they stepped into the frame. Lonnie finds himself in a room with a bag over his head. A million thoughts run through his mind. At first he thought it was Fisk. He'd found him, and he'd brought him in, he'd think. But then when the bag is released, he's surprised to find that it's not Wilson Fisk at all. And actually, stood on the other side of the room is a woman in a cat costume? How strange, Lonnie would think to himself. The woman, who would go by the name Black Cat, would interrogate Tombstone as to Kingpin's plans. Lonnie says that he doesn't work with him anymore, and the Black Cat says that she wants him dead. Lonnie says that there are a lot of people that want him dead, but what makes you so special? The Black Cat will go on to tell Lonnie that Kingpin murdered her father, and she wants revenge. She has been tracking Lonnie ever since he got out of prison, and saw him as an easy target to bring him in and to interrogate him as to where Kingpin is, and how to take him down, as she just wants to get back at him for all the pain and suffering that he brought to her family. Lonnie will say, so you put on a Halloween costume hunting down Fisk and his goons like you're some vigilante? Cat will ask, what is wrong with that? Isn't that what Spider-Man is? Lonnie will say, Spider-Man is a freak of nature. You're just a kid. Cat will realize that Lonnie is not at all threatened by her at all. And she also realizes that he's telling the truth. He's got no part of this anymore. He's got no life in the criminal underworld, and he just wants to separate himself from it. Lonnie is not defensive in the slightest. He's just truthful. Cat will ask him if he's got a family. Lonnie will say he does. Black Cat will say, what if Fisk took their lives? What would you do? Lonnie grits his teeth and says he'd rip him limb from limb. And that's why Cat will say to help her. Help her get revenge on her father. Lonnie will say this doesn't concern him, and he's trying to lay low. He doesn't want to get wrapped up in all this. Not again. Cat lets him go, as Lonnie leaves. Lonnie stays determined to protect his loved ones at any cost. And undeterred, Lonnie sets out on his journey to California, tracking down his family's whereabouts. Yet upon reaching their home, where he finally arrives, he discovers it's empty. There are nowhere to be seen, and after waiting to see if they'd return from being out or away for some time, his worst fears are realized when he finds out that there is only one explanation for all of this. Fisk has gotten to his family first. And it isn't just a coincidence. The home doesn't look lived in. It doesn't look like it's been lived in for a few days. They got there before Lonnie did. Fisk had kidnapped his family, using them as leverage to force Tombstone back into his service. With nowhere else to turn, Lonnie returns to New York, more determined than ever to catch Wilson Fisk and bring him to justice. This is when Black Cat will enter back into the film, as Tombstone seeks out the mysterious vigilante, hoping to enlist her help as to rescue his family. Reluctantly, she agrees, driven by her own desire for vengeance against Fisk for her father's death. Together they form an unlikely alliance, their shared goal uniting them against a common enemy. The rest of the film will build upon them trying to work with each other in the most unlikely of manner. They don't bounce off each other well, and they have no chemistry, but that's why this works. They are united by a common enemy, and can set aside their very differing personalities and ways of life for one thing: family. as the theme of this film becomes very clear. It's all about family. Lonnie will try to get to learn a little bit more about Black Cat and who she is as a person. However, she is very closed off, and will tell him who she is under the mask doesn't matter, and it isn't important. Lonnie will respect this privacy. As they infiltrate Fisk's hideout, Tombstone and Black Cat face off against Fisk and his men in a climactic and cinematic showdown. It's brutal and it's well fought. In the heart of the battle, Cat believes Fisk should be killed for killing her father. However, Lonnie restrains her, saying it's better off if he's sent to prison to live out the rest of his days, believing that Fisk should face justice for his crimes rather than meet a violent end. And with that, watching Fisk get sent off to prison as they finally overcome him, Black Cat manages to come to terms with her father's death, rather than being filled with anger and vengeance, and ultimately regret following Fisk's planned death. And as the dust settles, for helping return Fisk to prison, Lonnie is given an exception and is placed on house arrest instead of going back to Rikers as a reward. The Kingpin is a dangerous man, and Lonnie, along with the help of the Black Cat, may have done New York a massive favour in the long run. Lonnie and his family make the choice to move upstate and to leave Manhattan behind. He's not allowed to move state, but he'll move as far away from this place as possible. Lonnie, Rebecca, and Janice will finally start a new life together and get their happy ending. He wishes Black Cat good luck as they part ways for the last time. And with that, we come to the end of our film. The culmination of the cinematic universe is here. Here is the fight between Norman Osborn and Peter Parker. This is the final confrontation, the final battle. I bring you Spider-Man 3. Kick off the third installment in the Spider-Man franchise in the cinematic universe with Norman Osborn. This film will be a convergence for both Norman and Peter's characters, and just like the second film, this will feature them both as the main characters. Norman, after the last film, will be thinking of a way to get rid of Spider-Man. Kraven wasn't the answer, but he still needs him out of the picture. But just like we alluded to in Spider-Man 2, Norman is way in over his head, and he has started to become consumed with the power struggle that Spider-Man has created with him. He has an ego and can't accept that Spider-Man is by far the better and stronger opponent. Therefore, he will think that if he is going to beat Spider-Man and regain his pride, he will have to do it himself. The first couple of scenes, we will get introduced to the Green Goblin armor for the first time. However, it will be different. Not like how we've seen it before, but rather more in line with the new Ultimate Spider-Man Green Goblin armor. This isn't going to be your typical Green Goblin story, but something just as sinister. As we catch back up with Peter after Norman's inciting incident, we are reintroduced to Peter and Cindy and their friendship. It's stronger than ever after Peter revealed to Cindy in the last film that he was Spider-Man. Cindy will ask many questions as to how he got his powers and how his powers work, and this will slowly but comically become rather annoying for Peter. Cindy will say that she's just excited. Her best friend is a superhero. We will then cut to a montage of Peter and Cindy working together at the Daily Bugle as they got the jobs there at the last film. Cindy will write stories about Spider-Man and Peter will snap photos of himself in the costume. There will be a real camaraderie there and we'll get to see how much fun they have together. They will start spending more time with each other as well, almost every single day. It is then revealed that Aunt May and Peter have finally moved out of Anna Watson's and they have finally moved into an apartment on their own 2 feet, with the money that May is bringing in from Feast and the money that Peter is making at the Daily Bugle. Peter and Cindy will start spending every night almost at Peter's apartment, coming up with new story ideas and where they can snap more pictures of Spider-Man. Everything seems to be going right in life for both of them. We'll have a little narration from Peter during this time, kind of recapping these events and the montage that just passed. Also talking about how his relationship with Cindy is almost maybe taking a different direction. Peter's feelings seem confused, but this will be something that comes back around later in the film. Towards the end of the montage, we will get a scene where Cindy and Peter fall asleep, staying up all night, coming up with new ways to spin stories on Spider-Man. Cindy has her head leant on Peter's shoulder. Cindy wakes up rather startled. She looks over at Peter and realizes what time it is. She gets up and looks back towards Peter and smiles before she leaves his apartment. We then follow Cindy home that night, as she returns back to her apartment in New York. The last few films haven't explored Cindy in a lot of detail other than being Peter's best friend. However, this film will finally start to dive more into her as a character. There will be a short scene where it is revealed that Cindy only lives with her mother, and her father isn't about anymore. This will be later revealed that her father is the man known as Albert Moon, Norman Osborn's rival, and the antagonist of the Osborn film. It's left open-ended as to why their relationship deteriorated, but we get the understanding from this scene that they're not on speaking terms. We also maybe slightly get the sense that Cindy kind of feels lonely. After her father left, she was only left with her mother. She has craved some form of attachment ever since, which is why she was so frustrated when Peter started pushing her away during the last film. All of this is left up in the air, but is set to be resolved during the final stages later on. We will then cut to a few scenes following Aunt May into Feast, showing us her new workplace and how everything works. This is when we are introduced to another main player in this film, Martin Lee. However, this version of Martin Lee will be different to all the rest that we have seen before in Spider-Man media. Yes, he will own Feast, and in fact Feast will be more like a chain of feasts rather than just the one shelter, but Martin Lee will be a businessman and will be a wealthy one at that in New York. This scene with May will reveal to the audience that Lee is in fact also running for mayor alongside Norman Osborn in the re-election. Lee is a confident and collected man, someone who bursts with charisma similar to Norman Osborn. He almost seems like a perfect fit to go up against him. We then cut back to Midtown High. Peter and Cindy are in school together. They get a notification that something is going down just outside of Chinatown, and it looks like a job for Spider-Man. Peter goes and Cindy covers for him as she starts to do more research on the case during the middle of the lesson. Peter swings through the city as we get our big first action set piece of the film. He arrives on the scene to a burning building. Peter tries his best to save everyone that he can, however, there is one person that he can't save. Peter is burnt and bruised, and it looks like all hope is lost. It looks like Spider-Man might actually be defeated, which is when a man on a glider swoops into the building, and then in a sudden flash, and what felt like a split second, he bursts from the window with one person that was still trapped inside. Stood dramatically among the skies, the man was known to the public heroically as the Green Goblin in bright green and purple armor. The Goblin will say not to worry, the Green Goblin has everyone covered. Spider-Man is utterly confused by this. Who is this guy? And then he tries to confront the man, but the Goblin ignores him. The Goblin soaks up the appreciation from the police and the public, showing his appreciation for their support. When Spider-Man approaches him again, trying to ask, "Who the hell are you?" the Goblin shrugs him off and tells him to watch his back. He's not authorized to be on these streets. And after this dramatic introduction, we hard cut to a new segment. Peter and Cindy are sat on Peter's bed watching the news. Mayor Norman Osborn has just yesterday approved and signed off a new state law which allows only registered vigilantes to work alongside the police and US military to take forceful action against criminals in New York City. Taking a lot of inspiration from the Accords in the Civil War story, this is my version of it. However, instead of putting Iron Man against Captain America, I am putting Spider-Man against a Jonathan Hickman Ultimate Spider-Man inspired version of the Green Goblin. The Goblin will be the new hero on the block, adhering to the Accords while Spider-Man won't. It will also be revealed that the identity of the vigilantes that register has to be public knowledge, as Norman Osborn will then and there out himself as the Green Goblin, the man who saved the people in the fire yesterday. He will go on to tell the media that he is what the city needs, not Spider-Man. As Norman's intentions become very, very clear. He created the Green Goblin to push Spider-Man out the picture completely. If you can't beat him, just do it better than him, is the mentality that Osborn will have. Peter will say this is it. He's screwed. He's got the mayor of New York City against him. And then Cindy will comfort him, saying that maybe he just has to get on Osborn's good side. Peter asks how the hell is he going to do that? Osborn clearly hates him and is out to get him. Cindy will say that she doesn't know, but from what she's heard of Norman Osborn, he's not actually a bad guy. This will be then when Cindy reveals to Peter what her father did to Norman Osborn during the events of the Osborn film. Cindy will explain that she had to grow up with a narcissistic father. She will tell Peter that Norman will probably relate to him on that level if he just spoke through it with him. Peter will say maybe she's right. After all, Osborn has no ill intent. I guess he's just another superhero. This is when we cut to a scene with Spider-Man approaching Norman Osborn in the mayor's office. He climbs through the window and Norman will say that he's wondered when they'd have this interaction. Spider-Man will say that they need to talk about this Accords thing. Norman will say, "I don't think we do." Norman will go on to explain why he put it in place, and his major distaste for the way that Spider-Man does things. Spider-Man will realise he's getting nowhere, and will tell Norman that he just won't stop being Spider-Man for some stupid Accords. If someone's in danger, he won't stop because some ridiculous law says he can't intervene. If someone is in danger, if someone is hurt, Spider-Man will get involved. It's his responsibility. Norman will say intervene as your registered government identity, and then they'll talk. But Peter can't do that. A massive wave of doubt comes over Peter. Why does he keep this identity? Is Norman Osborn right? Will keeping this identity a secret do more harm than good? Won't he be able to be Spider-Man anymore? What matters more, his identity or the responsibility to save others? But Peter knows why he has the identity. He thinks back to Aunt May and Uncle Ben. he told Cindy. He told Cindy he's Spider-Man. Would it be really that bad if the whole world knew? Peter contemplates with himself as he leaves Norman's office, web-swinging away. We start to see a dramatic shift towards the Green Goblin over Spider-Man as we cut to the Daily Bugle. Cindy and Peter are called into their boss's office, J. Jonah Jameson, who says sales have been good because of their hard work on Spider-Man, but Green Goblin is all the rave now. We also get a slight inkling that Jonah prefers the Goblin politically and is more on the side of the Accords and feels more passionately about their identities being revealed. Jonah forces Peter and Cindy to move their work over towards the Goblin, which really adds a dampener onto their work, as it seems the Daily Bugle is more of a pro-Norman Osborn news source. They will think to themselves, well, what will they do? They can't create the same type of content on the Goblin as they do on Spider-Man. This then becomes a running problem and another thing that goes against Peter for the rest of the film. We will then skip forward slightly to a re-election debate between Norman and Lee. Norman Osborn will be cocky and confident, and his new Green Goblin persona will be a massive hit. He even swoops down to the debate on his Goblin glider, very much Iron Man style. The Goblin will have all the public praise, especially since the Daily Bugle have started to sway more towards the Goblin as well. However, Norman Osborn will completely underestimate Martin Lee. Lee comes out the blocks firing during the debate, bringing up political and social issues that Norman hasn't even bothered to fix around the city yet, and the audience start to switch sides. Osborn's ego and misjudgment is on full show here, and he's caught off guard. He was too obsessed with the power, he was too obsessed with his goal towards Spider-Man. And once again, just like the last film, Norman Osborn is losing. He's losing in another aspect of his life. He feels the same feeling he felt just a few months prior. We will then cut to a scene with Norman contemplating in his office, face to face with the Green Goblin armor. His attention away from Spider-Man slightly, and more onto the election. If he doesn't win this, everything else, all his power, goes out the window. He could just take him out, he will think to himself. No, he can't do that. He's a superhero. He's a man of the people. But for the greater good. The disappearance of Martin Lee would mean that the city would continue to have the almighty Green Goblin as their mayor. Norman starts to delusionally talk himself into this line of thinking before he sets out on his target. Martin Lee will die tonight. For the greater good. We then cut to a scene with Lee celebrating with what felt like a win on his part. He feels like the city is now on his side. He feels like the election is in his hands. He will be in his penthouse apartment suite he has in New York, pouring himself a whiskey. And then in the very backdrop of the New York City skyline, a man upon a glider will appear. He will smash through the window, catching Lee off guard, grabbing him by the throat, laughing as he does it. Lee will ask Osborn what is he doing, and Osborn will tell him that he needs to go. Norman kills Lee in his apartment and glides off into the night as if nothing happened. The next day, Peter wakes up and has some breakfast with Aunt May. They will catch up with each other and they will have a nice scene, saying how happy it is that they're living back together by themselves again. There is a big connection between these two characters and it's stronger than ever. However, whilst having breakfast, the news will be on in the background, when it will reveal the death of Martin Lee. Mayor Norman Osborn will be first to comment, saying it's a tragedy. It will cut back to forensics in Lee's apartment when Norman narrates over the top, saying none other than Spider-Man is the main suspect for his death. Motive is unknown, but they recovered some of his webbing at the scene of the crime. Peter spits out his cereal as he heads to his bedroom and calls Cindy immediately. Cindy picks up and they discuss the news. Spider-Man is now wanted by the police, but more frighteningly, the Green Goblin. On the Goblin side of things, it's revealed that Norman took some of Spider-Man's webbing from the time that he visited him at his office and kept it safe from dissolving. He then placed it at the scene of the crime before he left Lee's apartment, framing Spider-Man for the murder. Norman is on the cusp of getting what he wants, and this will be the point where we are entering the final stages of the film. Norman will give in to his sadistic and ego-driven thoughts for power and greed, and will feel the need to finish Spider-Man off as quickly as humanly possible. Major news sources are against him, the public are against him, the Accords are against him, the police are against him. Now is the best time to finish him off while he has the chance. Osborn will think back to what Peter said when they met. If there's someone in danger, he won't hesitate to help them. And that's when Osborn enacts his final plan. Stage a crime, stage something that Spider-Man couldn't resist. Meanwhile, on the Peter side of things, Peter and Cindy will be discussing how all of this conveniently lines up with what Osborn wants. They will conclude that all of this was Osborn's doing, And it's all aroused to take Spider-Man out completely. Peter will say maybe Norman isn't the man you thought he was. Cindy will say that not many people in her life are who they appear to be. This will then turn into a nice moment where Cindy will reveal how much it meant to her when Peter revealed his identity to her finally. Peter and Cindy will smile at each other as tension rises. However, it will be quickly broken when Peter goes back into panic mode. He will think back to earlier. What if he just reveals his identity? Cindy will instinctively tell him that's a really bad idea. Not only will he put people in danger, it will go against everything he's been fighting for. Don't do it. It's what Norman wants. But Peter will insist, saying that it'll be a move that Norman won't expect. It'll catch Norman Osborn off guard, and if his identity comes out, the public will finally see him for who he truly is. Not a killer, just a kid. Cindy will tell him that's the worst idea ever. He's already wanted for murder. The mask is the only thing keeping him from not being in prison. Peter says he has an alibi though, and he'd be able to get out of it. Peter will say the way to beat the Goblin is at his own game. Cindy will disagree. Peter will leave out the window, and Cindy will try and stop him. She will rush out of his apartment and follow him to where he arrives. We will cut to a scene where Spider-Man will land at Times Square and will start to accumulate an audience around him. People will throw things at him and boo him, but Spider-Man will say that he has something to tell them. He will say how he's not done any of the things he's been accused of. He's only wanted to do good. But if he is to level with Norman Osborn, he has to play his game. As people filmed and streamed around him, amounting all sorts of viewers over social media, Cindy will be running to the scene telling him to stop. But before Peter could pull the mask up from his face, an explosion can be heard in the distance. Peter leaves his mask down as he approaches a fighting stance. This catches Cindy's attention and the public's attention also. Spider-Man leaps up and swings towards the scene, 2 blocks away. When Spider-Man lands on the scene, it's a bunch of random people dressed in military-grade armor shooting rocket launchers at random buildings. Peter will be utterly confused as to why they are doing this. But that's not the point. People are screaming, people are hurt, Spider-Man can't help himself. He starts taking out the guards one by one, but no one seems to be putting up a fight. And that's when his spider sense goes off. Of course. It was a trap. The Green Goblin swoops down on his glider and tackles Spider-Man, taking him out. Peter collapses to the floor and stands up hesitantly, realizing that the Goblin had caught him with his blade, as blood starts seeping from his side. Peter coughs, as the Goblin says, this is his end. Peter and the Goblin fight hand to hand. The enhanced exosuit of the Green Goblin helps Norman's attempts to hurt Peter. They fight and the Goblin gets the upper hand, beating down on Spider-Man. The crowd from Times Square suddenly forms around the fight, including Cindy Moon. The Goblin batters down on Peter, knocking him unconscious. The Goblin picks him up by his throat and holds him up for everyone to see. He says Spider-Man has finally been defeated. This is the end of Spider-Man, the murderer that he is. The Goblin throws him to the ground in front of the crowd. Cindy, in a panic, rushes over to Spider-Man's aid as the Goblin laughs and watches on. Cindy quietly chants his name to get up. She'll start to cry, teary-eyed, telling Peter he needs to get up. He's got to get up. The Goblin's footsteps start to approach Cindy from behind as she says she loves him in the wave of pure emotion. She says she loves him so much, he has to get up. She begs for him to get up. The Goblin comes over and crouches down next to Cindy, who cries over Peter's limp body. The Goblin says it's okay, as he places his hand on Cindy's head patronizingly. Cindy is shoved aside as the Goblin looks at his trophy, defeated. But a slight gap forms in Peter's eye, and when the Goblin turns his back to gloat in front of the ever-grown crowd, Spider-Man jolts up, kicking the Goblin in the face. Peter holds his side as he webs it up, waiting for the Goblin's next attack. As the Goblin's rage evolves into his fighting style, Peter, slightly limited to what he could do due to his injury, calculates his every move, sort of representing the game of chess that him and Norman have been playing for the past 2 films. Peter dodges, moves, and punches in all the right places, until finally, he beats the Green Goblin, and everything is finally over. After the dust is settled, we cut to the aftermath. After the web from the crime scene was analysed further, it was found out that it was older than the incident and the death of Martin Lee, which means that Spider-Man could have never killed him. Spider-Man is in the clear. The murder is then placed on the shoulders of Norman Osborn, as Norman had no alibi. No alibi could be found for the man that would be charged for the murder, and he is found guilty, stripped of his mayor duties, and sent down for good. Peter won. He didn't reveal his identity, but he came pretty close to. He didn't have to play Norman's game. All he had to do is keep believing in himself when all the odds were stacked against him. We then get a rather comedic scene where Peter and Cindy visit J. Jonah Jameson at the Daily Bugle, bringing him photos and new stories revolving around Spider-Man. Jameson, still clearly bitter about the Goblin's arrest, starts to resent Spider-Man for this reason, and in this universe, this will be the origin reasoning as to why J. Jonah Jameson goes on to hate Spider-Man. Cindy and Peter will leave his office and will have an awkward moment with each other. Cindy will tell Peter how she leant over his body thinking he was dead. She will tell him that she's been wanting to tell him something for a while now, and it's been at the back of her mind, but seeing him almost die made it real for her. Peter asks, "What is that?" And Cindy will just kiss him. Peter's eyes will widen, and he will kiss her back. They both won't know what to say, as we fade out, ending our film and our trilogy right there. Thank you very much for watching the Spider-Man Cinematic Universe movie version. Hopefully, all the films all put together to create one cohesive narrative all made the experience so much better and so much more enjoyable than watching them part for part with intros, outros, etc. But at the moment, this is it. If you guys want to see more, make sure to leave a like on this video. If we get 100 likes on this video, I will start making phase 2 of the Spider-Man Cinematic Universe. So make sure you hit that like button. Make sure you're subscribed if you are new so you do not miss any more fan fictions uploading every Thursday and Sunday on LewisFiction. And I'll see you guys in the next video. Take care and peace.